Currently, we are joined by Councillor Grenier, Councillor Wingard, Councillor Robertson, Councillor Gardner, and Councillor Perry. And welcome to our second budget workshop, where we're going to discuss public works and infrastructure services. And I think Sophie is going to get us started.
It's always my goal to get you kicked off. I will tell you that we're going to shift today a little bit. I had thought that we would add facilities in here because Rob has just taken over as the chair, as the supervisor of facilities. But when I got really dialed into this presentation, I think you guys are going to spend a bulk of time with Joe and Rob talking about infrastructure. So I've moved that, and Rob and I can talk about whether or not this is something I can take for him when we do general government or the facilities piece.
Good plan.
My assumption is you guys want to be done in 2 hours, if at all possible. And the other thing I just want to, it's been on the news. The governor has submitted a supplemental budget, and that budget includes additional money for schools, funding them up to 55% for the first time, I think, ever, and actually meeting almost all of their revenue sharing commitments. So they would go to 4.5%. So I talked briefly with Tom today. I am trying to come up with some projections that I will get out to folks with updated sheets to let you know where that would put us. But just the updated revenue projections from the State Revenue Forecasting Committee at the 3.75% that we originally budgeted for in the budget brings in another $111,000 to us. So my back of the envelope, if I was going to borrow a Rob Yerxa term, my back of the envelope at 4.5% with the new revenue forecast would be an increase of another approximately $400,000 to the town. So that just kind of, we're getting there. You haven't even had to cut anything yet, and we're making progress.
Sophie, I'm wondering if you could check with Meredith Higgins and see if they have a handle on what raising the education subsidy to the limit that they're talking about, what that has for their request.
So I did reach out to her this morning, and what I received back was a very nice email that explained that MMA is a little bit ahead of Maine School Management because the only thing she had seen was what she had read in the newspaper. So she's not really ready to make some. Her other thought is that where they are headed to their local budget meeting, all I can think of is their town meeting for
validation, I think is what they call it.
She was thinking that likely any increase they would just simply accept and put into their unassigned fund for future use. So she said as things changed, she would keep me informed. So I'll keep an eye out for that.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. I thought we would just jump right into tonight if that works for folks.
Great.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Do you see the presentation or do you see a blue screen?
We see WPC.
All right. And do you still see WPCF?
Nope, now we see a grid.
All right.
Budget screen, I guess.
Yeah. This is me getting used to 3 screens. Okay. Now you see public infrastructure?
Now we see, yes.
All right, excellent. So I just want to remind you guys, I can see Terry, Tom, Joe, and Jeff, and other than that, I can't. So please just verbally let me know if I need to stop so you guys can talk.
Yep.
So when we talk about public infrastructure, we're really talking about public works, which we say as one word, but really is a whole host of services. General maintenance, winter maintenance, fleet maintenance, solid waste, cemeteries, and now facilities, and also the water pollution control facility. And you'll notice I made Joe green for two reasons. Number one, he always likes to be green, flush with money, and green, good for the environment. But I also just wanted to highlight that while Public Works is funded by general fund taxes, meaning the property tax, our WPCF is wholly sustained through user fees and other associated fees. So if people are looking to try to save money, cuts in WPCF will not affect the tax rate. Okay?
Yep.
All right, so let's talk about operations in Public Works. So our Public Works budget in total, and I am not including facilities in this number, is $1.8 million. So a little over $1 million of that is held in, excuse me for just a minute, I'm sorry. I just realized that all my notes are not showing because you're seeing it. There we go. There we go. Should be a little bit easier. So when we talk about general maintenance, this is where Rob puts the bulk of our operating costs associated, all of our personnel costs, except for the mechanic and also overtime associated with plowing the roads. Nance, can you grab that off the printer? So we're talking about funding 12 and a half full-time people. A half a person is that unfunded shared labor position that was shared in the winter with Public Works and in the summer with WPCF. That includes, I'm sorry, give me just a second. Can I have the first part? It didn't print with the notes. Folks, I just need 1 minute. I apologize.
Yep, that's no problem.
All right, you have me now.
Good.
So when we talk about general maintenance, before we even get to general maintenance, the total public works budget is up $118,000 or 2.55%. Our general maintenance line has increased about $35,000 or 3.5%. Winter maintenance is up, has decreased $20,185 or a decrease of about 8.8%. Our cemeteries, hold your seats, has decreased by $75 or 1.23%. Solid waste has an increase of almost $13,000 for almost 4%. And our fleet maintenance facility is increased by $17,665 or about 7.5%. So let's look at general maintenance. These are the year-round base wages and overtime for general purposes, which if you look in the budget book is only about $3,500 a year. The increase in personnel costs of about $48,000 from FY22 is related to the shared position that was not funded last year that is back in the budget this year. As well as increases in workers' comp, which I think we started talking about the last time we had a budget meeting, that the premium is up and that gets distributed across all departments. And we also have $28,000 increase that is attributable to market wage adjustment that we made in FY21, as well as 2% FY22 COLA. Then I think as we get to the end of this, Rob is going to want to talk a little bit, Rob and I are going to want to talk with you a little bit about our concerns as we look at the labor market. So when we look at operating supplies and materials, you'll see it's a pretty small piece of our general budget. But that's a decrease of $500 and it's attributable to asphalt supplies decreasing. Traffic, streetlights and traffic lights is actually decreased by about $15,000 over last year. And this is Rob really dialing in what our savings on electricity from that LED streetlight conversion project is. He's still carrying some money in that budget line for our maintenance contract. Fuel he is decreasing that $3,000 from last year. And we are actually seeing an increase of about $5,000 in contractual services. And that can mean different things for different departments, but in public works, at least in this division, it means all of the outside contractors that Rob needs to meet regulatory or license or requirements or contractual agreements. So things like road markings. We have an agreement with UCU around sharing the cost of maintaining space that kind of where our property line kind of goes in and out around their property. We are required to manage public trees, and we also have an MS4 permit. So MS4 is the storm sewer system permit. And that entire $5,000 increase is in tree maintenance this year. And so, I think Rob, yeah.
Sophie, when you go back up to fuel and gasoline, there's a 6-month comment beside it. Yep. What does that mean?
So with general maintenance, there are some costs that we have all through the year that we split between winter maintenance and fuel and general maintenance. So this would be gasoline and diesel starting in May. So May to October. Does that sound like 6 months? Ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay. So winter maintenance, again, the general personnel costs are carried in general maintenance. So this includes in the personnel costs, it's overtime and all of the associated taxes and expenses related to that. So our personnel costs have gone up $2,315. Rob budgets a flat rate for that overtime. So the increase is attributable to the workers' comp premium and an increase that is required for our retirement system. Our supplies and materials, sand, rolled salt, magnesium chloride, asphalt supplies, and tools actually decreased $14,000 from last year. $10,000 of that decrease is based on Rob's suggestion and my suggestion that we create a winter maintenance reserve account and allocate $20,000 from our current assigned fund balance. So just moving some fund balance around for that. I think the concern is that the cost, unfortunately, storms don't all cost the same amount, and we don't know how many to clean up from, and we don't know how many we're going to have each year. It goes through pretty extreme cycles. Last year was a pretty light year, which means that we have some money left at the end of the year. Other years we would go well over what we spent this year. So the thought is, instead of having to be concerned about those extremes, if we budgeted for the average and held a reserve if we went over, it would allow us on an annual basis to budget less. And I think Rob is prepared to chat about that if folks want to, either now or later. The fuel is actually a decrease of about $8,500 over last year. And it is based on our trends, because remember, we have bulk fuel. So we're buying without all the taxes and at a bulk rate. And Rob keeps very careful track of that. And this is based on his trends for making assumptions for what he's going to be doing, as well as the costs that we're seeing with fuel. Ready to go to the next page?
Sure.
Cemetery is not our largest budget, but it is a super important place. All of the payroll expenses and mowing expenses are actually held in the general line. So fuel and all that stuff would be in the general line. Utilities for the cemetery are where we actually saw our decrease of $75 last year. We hold $500 to be able to fix issues with the building or the tomb. And we have $4,800 for grub response and other types of contract services that we might need in the cemetery. We are not allowed to use pesticides without special certification on the municipal side. So if we need anything with pesticides, we have to go out to a consultant or a contractor to do that for us. Ready to move on? Okay. Solid waste.
I have a question.
Sure.
Would it be possible to not use pesticides?
So we, in the past, have actually had them apply beneficial nematodes. Does that sound right?
Yep.
So that is kind of what we do. We can't apply. My understanding is we're not allowed to apply them.
Okay, so they're not necessarily synthetic chemicals. They're just. Okay.
No, not necessarily.
The critters.
Ready? Okay. So in solid waste, our personnel costs are actually only the workers' comp premium. We break it out because the insurance company breaks it out for us so that we can apply the costs appropriately. This is an increase from last year of about $2,000. Landfill has absolutely no change. That is exactly the same rate that we paid last year. MSW, which would be municipal solid waste or trash, is showing a $7,400 increase from last year. It's a contractual increase in the tip fee and also the collection services. So the actual act of the weekly collection and the cost of tipping it to be processed. Our recycling is up $3,500, and that is attributable to the same thing. The contract had an escalator in it, and the tip fee at the gate is also has an escalator in it. This 68,827 does not include a drop-off recycling program at the landfill. That we have that on here as an item for discussion. But that would add approximately $13,000 a year to the budget if you wanted to add that in. So fleet maintenance facility, a lot of people call it the public works facility. We budget all of the costs associated with the mechanic maintaining the fleet, but also all of the costs associated with maintaining the public works facility are all part of that budget. So that budget personnel costs are up about $4,000 over last year. And that is attributable to a market wage adjustment and the workers' comp premium. We have the shop supplies line, and that actually did not change from 2021. Our fleet repair has increased $1,500 from FY21, and that has to do with the fact that we're having to buy more specialized fluids that are increasing the cost of the oils and fluids line. And our facilities O&M is going up about $12,185, and that is attributable to the fact that it is time. We've been in the building for 5 years. It's time to clean the HVAC system, and so we need a contractor to come in and do that for us. And also our LP gas has gone up a little bit. So when we think about operation, the areas that we had for discussion, some of these are staff and some of these are counselors, but want to talk with you about the shared laborer position. We want to talk with you about landfill services. How are we selecting our hours of operation? And more importantly, are those hours meeting the community's needs? Our winter maintenance reserve and the drop-off recycling program. Tom, I thought I could just stop my screen share so people could come back and we could see folks.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
So,
Sophie, can you, at the outset, you were talking about getting more money from the state and, you know, $400,000 accounted for. So that's 400,000 of the, like, basically $1 million that our budget had gone up. Is that?
so
Am I in the am I in like the realm?
yep, there are some other small savings that we've found along the way. So I will have new budget printouts, but I kind of wanted to wait till we got through tonight to see if we were going to make changes. So I would get them out for you over the weekend. But by my count, with that increase, you are down. We are down from $1 million to closer to $700,000 or $800,000, $700,000. When we add up all of the savings since we printed the budget. Am I $800,000?
So let's start off with the personnel discussion. And Rob, I'd be interested in hearing, you did not have the half-time person this past year. We eliminated that position for the year. I'd be interested in hearing how that impacted your ability to deliver services in the winter, and how it would impact you both ways, to have that position back for the coming year or to not have it back?
Sure. So this winter was kind of a tough winter to gauge impact on anything because, right, it was in my 13 years, it was the most mild, non-stormy winter that we've had. So,
Right.
it's kind of a difficult year to judge how that worked out. I will say from times when we've not had that person, it is all about dedicating that person to the sidewalk maintenance response. So that person, basically we have two crews that work together of two groups of 5. And those crews work 16-hour shifts with 8 hours in between opposing so that there's an 8-hour overlap and then they're by themselves. This shared position can work independently of those cycles without affecting the rest of our work. So those 5 people are dedicated to the 5 main plow routes that we have. And until the roads are plowed and cleaned up, those guys can't do anything else. So if I have the timing of a storm pushing us into the early morning when we're looking at school starting at 8 o'clock, we try to say, town turns into a pumpkin around 7 o'clock, right? So you've got to have your parking lots done, your sidewalks done, and your roads in good shape by that time. And so having that person independent of everything else that's going on allows us to kind of schedule that and say, all right, at 2 o'clock in the morning, we're going to bring our sidewalk person in so that we can get started. We know we'll be finished with our roads. We probably still going to be working on our parking lots and cleaning up the side roads, but we can get a jump on the sidewalks to get them done. And then that's what people see, that people see at 7 o'clock when they look out the window that the sidewalk on Main Street's done, or they're, things like that. Without that flexibility of being able to schedule independent of the 5 plow routes, everything has to kind of happen in succession. So the roads have to be done, and then that begins to free up people that can start parking lots. And then once the parking lots are satisfactory, because we've got to get the businesses, the parking lots downtown, Pine Street, Mill Street, and the credit union primarily, opened up and ready to go when those businesses start to open. So that's our first priority when we start to transition away from the roads. And that doesn't allow us to begin sidewalks until we start transitioning over to doing the smaller parking lots and getting the schools going. So once we get into that place, we can usually start breaking someone away. So that process takes 2 or 3 hours. So that's that immediate delay in the response for sidewalks. That is probably, if you did about a 4-mile delay, a 4-hour delay, you're probably looking at about a 4-mile delay. And so instead of being a third of the way through the primary sidewalks, we're at ground zero without that, which translates to a lot of time where the town has turned to a pumpkin at 7 o'clock and we haven't had the opportunity to start sidewalks yet. So that's kind of that's the impact, the immediate impact of not having that position filled.
Any questions from other councilors on that topic? I wish it had been a normal winter so we could better judge the the impact. Okay.
I have a question for maybe Sophie or maybe Rob can answer this in general about the increased workman's comp claims, and maybe you can explain what the town is doing to mitigate that in the future.
So normally when you would see increased workers' comp claims, it would be because somebody was at average and went way up. Part of our issue is we had done such an amazing job and had been very, very lucky that we were running with a mod rating, an experience rating of 0.67 for a while, which then jumped up to 0.8, which now is at like 1.3, 1.03 or some, so when we look at that, we have an incredibly active safety culture here. We do accident investigations, we do a lot of training, and we've invested a lot in resources to help people stay safe. But when somebody in public works slips on a piece of ice as they're trying to thaw out a culvert, they have the right shoes on, they've done the things they're supposed to do, it's an accident. And we managed to have a couple of claims that laid people up for a while, and those lost wages really hurt us. So to go one step further, I would not expect us to go back as low as we went. I think we'll stabilize under 1 because of our culture. But I think part of what we had an artificially low premium because we were extraordinarily lucky, along with our wonderful culture.
Thank you.
Sophie, or Rob, did the virus affect or impact anything last year with people out with, I mean, as far as like the budget goes for what we spend? I know there were a lot of people out last year and shifts were continuously, changing and things.
So last year with Public Works and WPCF, when we sent people home, if we were telling them they couldn't come here, we continued to pay a base rate. We did not pay overtime if they were called in for a storm. We said, until you plow more than 40 hours for us, we're not going to pay you overtime. So we actually, I wouldn't say had savings, but we didn't see major issues with wages there. I will tell you where the issue with the pandemic came in is that we have people who want to be out and about and working. They do not like to sit and not work or not be able to really get lined up through things quickly. And so the delay in being able to get back out into the world, I think, caused a little bit of stress because they saw all the things they wanted to accomplish and couldn't get to. But that's not a monetary damage. It's just, it tells you about the kind of people that we have working for us.
Thank you.
Other questions? I'm anxious, Rob, to hear a little bit more about this plan of winter reserve fund. Can you give me an idea of what the range is from a winter when we have a lot of demand for sand and salt to a winter that we don't have as much demand? Is it a huge range?
Well, yes. So, for example, this season, we're underspent in excess of $50,000 in that line. In my experience, I've only exceeded the budget. We've spent, closer to 140, 145,000 in the past on a real, one of the bigger winters that we had. We pushed 2,000 ton of salt, but that season we got 156 inches of snow. So it was one of the more extreme winters that I've worked through. So that's kind of why it tends to be a little more that we push the budget, but we don't. There's $10,000 or $15,000 left over in an average winter, or one that was maybe a little bit more severe than a normal winter. But I got to make sure so the request reflects a certain level of contingency, right? So that I'm not, I don't want to lowball that account because it's something where we really don't have a lot of discretion or control, right? We work real hard to use salt only when we need it. We meter it. We have prescribed spreading routes. But if we get 150 inches of snow, I got to treat 150 inches of snow, and that's the part that forces me to build a little bit of contingency in there because there is no reserve to fall back on except the general fund. So if we were able to, and this year seems to be, in my mind, a good year to try it, if I did have a little bit of a safety net, knowing that there was a reserve that would accommodate for some of the more extreme seasons, we could back off a little bit, and we're saying we want to try around $10,000 this year in reduction, so that if it does go over and we do have an extreme winter, there's a place to fall back on. And given the fact that this season we're in excess of $50,000 under budget for salt because of the conditions that we face
Right.
this winter, it seems like a good opportunity to give it a shot.
Mhm. Thank you. Other question from council on Public Works?
On Public Works or this topic?
Well, either.
Okay. I'd like to talk about the solid waste program and the recycling. If we're ready for that.
Sure.
We ready for that?
Yes.
Okay, good. We did last year, and I know council knows this too. We tried to find a way to help residents recycle. Not residents, renters recycle, renters who don't have curbside, and it amounts to about 3,500 residents who are renters in the municipality, which is about a third of us who can't recycle, or a third of people who can't recycle curbside and really don't have any other place to do it with the big complexes. So I would like to support putting recycling bins out at the landfill, and then creating a program or some kind of education. I think Sophie and I talked about this when it's done, or next, there's another grant coming up for this that we might be able to get funded for if we do some comprehensive kind of robust education program to get people to recycle. I know it's not a great, I don't think it's a great situation to ask people to drive their recycling to the landfill, but it's an option. And right now there is no option. So I think in the budget it was like 16, but I think Sophie, you said 13,000. Okay, so I'd like to at least try that if that's possible, and help the residents around here who have no access right now to recycling.
On this same topic, any other comments on this topic? Laura?
Yeah, I guess I'm in support of recycling, but I don't know that bins out on Taylor Road are going to address what the problem that you're describing, Cheryl. And so I don't know if it's an on-site dumpster at some of these places, or a partnership with Humane on a location that's kind of already convenient, but I don't think it's worth the investment at this location.
Okay,
personally.
let me speak to that, okay? Because this was researched. I went to pretty much all of the complex people. I went to Talmar, I went to Hasbrook. It includes our low low renters, our low, I don't know what is low socioeconomic kind of places. It includes pretty much every place where there's a complex, or there's a large amount of apartments. And so I have researched this, and I have gone to this, and I did write a grant for this. And my thinking is, and also talking to Waste Management in Augusta, is that we really need to have something. And so this was the last resort. We can't do anything right now, but we can do this. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It can be a pilot program, but it needs to be started. We need to have something. And right now we don't have anything. And I'd like to get this at least off the ground so that I can start working on a more robust program. I also talked to Augusta about the fact that when we do have people who are renting, they don't fall into that homeownership kind of resident which puts them in a different income bracket. And when we exclude people in a different income bracket, then we are not practicing environmental justice. We are only letting people who own homes have curbside pickup for their recycling. Everybody else's recycling goes into solid waste. And so I know it's not ideal. It is not ideal. It is not the best solution, but it gives us time to work on a solution, and it gives us an option. It gives people an option. And I know that students, and we've talked about this kind of ad nauseum, students are growing up these days with recycling as something that they do. It's like putting on a seatbelt. It's a lifestyle for them. And when they come to these complexes, and the complexes will not put recycling bins, there's several reasons why they won't do it. And some of it's they don't want to take up parking. Some of it is they don't trust students to throw recycling in the recycling bins. They're going to throw their mattresses in there or something. They've got all kinds of reasons. But students are asking, and Hasbrook is asking, and Talmar is asking for a way to recycle. And we are trying to find a way for them to at least, for the municipality to at least step up and provide a way for people to be part of our culture, part of our environmental culture. And that's the only way that we have found at the moment. We're working on trying to get landlords to comply or find a way for them to feel that it's worthy to put recycling bins outside their complexes. And so for me, this is a step. It's a step, and I think it's a worthy step to help our community.
Cheryl, as we all know, this is definitely a big passion of yours, and I can appreciate that because you're very vocal about everything that applies to this. However, I have to say that because a complex chooses to not do the work that they should, because they're gaining all the revenue. Like we go to businesses and say, here's your responsibility, you need to do this, or they do this. I think it's very unfair to throw it on the citizens of Orono because some complex says, I don't want to deal whether or not they throw rubbish in it. And so I'm not thinking this is a good idea, simply because it pushes the ownership onto citizens who really have no engagement involved in this. These are the people who are profiteering off of many, many students. It's a simple thing. If the students are passionate about this, which I agree they probably are, they should be going to their complex owner saying, we need this. I just think it's unfair to ask the citizens of Orono to be the stewards for somebody who's not willing to put the investment in that. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So I'm not in favor of asking for additional monies for.
No, thank you. No, it's okay. Thanks, Terry. So talking to Augusta again, I called down and I had a long conversation with Waste Management about this, and this was their suggestion that this be a pilot program to see if this works, and they will, and then once we put something in play, they will fund. They'll start to see that we're serious about this, and they will fund it. The only other thing that we can do to help out is an ordinance change, and I don't know if that's a road that we want to walk down, but maybe it is. So that the landlords are compelled, that they are mandated, and this doesn't include just the complexes. This includes our other landlords too. This includes any unit that's I think it's 4 or more. Belle can help me out with that. 4 or more units, or Rob.
It's more than 4.
More than 4, right? And that's not just the complexes either. That's those are our big landlords in town. So it applies to them as well. So I have looked at this from all different angles over the last year, interviewed lots of people, and really just need to show that we're serious about this, and that we can get funding for it if we can show that it's worthy, that it works. So I just want to just get a foot in the door. And, and Rob is, I mean, I talked to Rob and Sophie about this too. So I don't know if maybe you could help me out a little bit.
Sorry.
Yeah, let's let everybody get a chance to talk. Go ahead, Megan.
I appreciate all of the work that you've done, Cheryl, and I don't think anybody is contesting that you've put a lot of work and talked to a lot of people and done a lot of research whatsoever. And I am in general, like Laura said, extremely supportive of the idea of recycle. Well, I'm more supportive of the idea of holding corporations accountable for the waste that they create, not putting the onus on the consumer to figure out where to put it when it's at our house. But that's a whole other kettle of fish. But when it comes to bins out at the landfill and thinking about, I mean, yes, larger landlords, it's not just the student housing complexes. I understand it's going to be other apartment complexes that are impacted, but the student housing complexes are by far the largest chunk of that pie. And my question is really, I mean, as much as younger people are raised to think about recycling in this way and to be passionate about it, are they actually, they might say that they want to do it. Are they actually going to get in their car and drive to the landfill and put it in a bin? I'm not sure that they are. And I understand Terry's logic in saying, if this is something that's, say, the vast majority of the students who live at these giant housing complexes are passionate about recycling, and this is something they really want, then why is it not the complex's responsibility, I mean, to provide that? Or why is that the municipality's responsibility? And the only reason I'm thinking a lot about how recycling has gone from something that the United States in general could make money on to something that now residents, businesses, and municipalities are subsidizing to greater and greater degree. And I'm not completely against the idea of a pilot program, but I also wonder, like, is this the year for the pilot program? When we're looking at the budget we're looking at, I would say that I'm not as forcefully against it, I think, as you've heard expressed. I think that I could go for a pilot program. I am hesitant about thinking that it actually would draw people to drive out there and put the recycling in those bins, especially from the student housing complexes. I wonder why it is the municipality's responsibility financially and not the person who's providing the living situation. And is this the year for the pilot program based on the budget we're looking at? So I'm kind of a little bit back and forth on it right now. I'm a little lukewarm on it because of some of the pieces involved, I think.
Let's see if other people want to comment on this. Is there anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak to this issue that would like to? Jeff?
Yeah, this is maybe a question that Rob or Sophie can answer. Do we see a relationship between lower solid waste disposal and tip up costs when we see an increase in recycling costs? Does that make sense? Like, if we invested $13,000 in more recycling, would we see a concurrent $13,000 reduction in our solid waste bill?
No. Tip fee for recycling is about 50% when everything is working the way it should. Right now, we're actually paying about $135 a ton to tip recycling and about $75 a ton to tip MSW. And so the
stream we're looking to tap into is a stream that already pays for itself. The commercial and large scale residential complexes already have to pay their own tipping fees. So if anything, the larger complexes would see the results. It wouldn't affect our budget in any way.
Laura?
This seems like an ideal policy instead of a budget line item. And so can this be part of either the rental regulation package or just a separate ordinance around large multi-unit sites having to provide recycling bins?
Mhm. That was the other option, was to change the ordinance, was to just go right in and just change the ordinance. So that they
I
would
would
be,
be-
so that they would need to, and that was suggested by Augusta as well.
I'm very comfortable supporting that.
Sophie, you want to comment on that?
The only thing I would suggest is, I think it would make sense if we're gonna provide a recycling service, if we just mandated it and people who had 4 or more units were responsible for providing the way for people to do that. I think that's how you get the most. I think that's how you'll get the most buy-in.
question.
I also think that is how you will get, I think you'll get a lot of pushback because this is not a cheap thing. So just from a budgetary standpoint, that would not incur cost. So you could kind of set that discussion aside and put it on the work plan if you wanted to.
Lori?
I want to thank Councilor Robertson for this excellent work. When I was campaigning, this is what the students at the big complexes were saying. And I met with Dan Dixon and, you know, we worked on it, and it was just a huge, huge issue. And I am so pleased that you've continued and done way more and made some suggestions of what we can do. And I don't think that it's something to put off. I think that what you've come up with is taken a lot of time, and I support it. And I like Sophie's suggestion that we just tell that we mandate it. So I support that.
Thank you, Lori. And the pushback was what I was getting from the landlords when I was driving and talking to them. I think this might have been pre-COVID. I don't remember wearing a mask, but anyway, we and one of the things they said was, you know, well, we'll do what we can do, but don't mandate it. We already pay too much. We pay too many taxes in this town. And so trying to find a way to, trying to find a way to balance that, you know, not trying to find a way to balance what they believe is a high cost, and what we have resolved to do through resolution is commit to recycling. And then 3,500 people do not recycle, have no option. And those people that don't recycle are not homeowners, they're renters. And trying to get the complexes and people like, you know, well, I'm not going to name our big landlords around town. Everybody knows who they are. You know, they also have options too. And so we're trying to just do the best that we can with what we have to work with. I am in support of an ordinance change, but I didn't want to bring that to council because I thought that would just take so long to do. But if it's something that council wants to do, then as a way to, increase, it's a way to keep our environment clean and not to have things that can be recycled, and especially cardboard, because there's still a market for that, go directly into a landfill is, for me, is worth it. So yeah, I'm in favor of whatever we can do. And if it's mandating that these big complexes have a recycling bin, I'm in favor of that as well. I'm just trying to find a way right now for us to be supportive and to honor our resolution to recycle. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks. Thank you. You know, I think we've had quite a bit of discussion on this topic, and I don't sense we're going to resolve it tonight. So I'm wondering if it's not time to move on. I just don't see this getting getting resolved in our budget workshop. It may come back in another form. Sophie, did you have anything?
Yeah, I did have, we had a counselor with some questions about the landfill, and I just haven't had a chance to circle back with that counselor, but it did bring up for me if they're, just to ask, are we concerned about the, whether or not we're meeting the needs of the landfill with the current level of hours that it's open and schedule? And so if it's a single issue, that's something I can talk with, but if it's a broader issue, we would want to make sure we capture that during the budget discussions.
I have heard no complaints about the hours for the landfill. I don't know about other people. I think it works quite well. The people who are out there are very helpful. Having the free weekend that I'm all ready to be out there first thing tomorrow morning is a great thing. Unless somebody else has a different perspective on it, I think we're okay with how we're handling the hours out there.
Tom, you only
Okay.
get 5 truckloads.
How
I
many?
beg your pardon?
Tom only gets 5 truckloads. That's it.
Oh, come on. It's
And
not
I
a
hate
big
to-
truck.
I hate to put your feet to the fire, but I'm gonna go back to that shared labor position because I got absolutely no direction out of that discussion. And if it's we want to wait and think about it, I can hear that, but I don't want to just drop, because from staff's perspective, this is 100% a council decision. It's an empty position. And the only thing that I don't want to have happen is for us to sit here on a beautiful May afternoon and decide it's great to cut the level of service on sidewalks. And then in December, when people start squawking, Rob and I have to go in and when you say, isn't there something you can do? We all want to do it. And we just we wouldn't have the resource to make that happen. So I just want to make sure that you understand the impact and
I'm
perhaps
happy
we
to
could
jump
get
in
somewhere.
and say that I do not wish to cut the level of service to sidewalks. I understand how big of an issue it is in this town. I sometimes poke fun at it, but last year was a different year. We were in a tough spot with the budget. There was possibly an expectation that people shouldn't be going anywhere anyway. But I think that is a level of service that the residents of this town expect. It may not always happen as quickly as they may want based on the services that we can provide with the budget we have, but I am in support of adding that back into the budget this year.
I am in support of leaving it there for now. However, when we get through the budget and have a final discussion on it, it's a topic that I might want to come back to personally. There are many communities in New England where they have lots of snow and they don't do anything about plowing sidewalks. Now, I'm not advocating for that, but I think our expectation for sidewalk clearing is higher in this community than most places. Are we ready to move on? Okay. Back to you, Sophie, I guess.
I hope you see the discussion slide that we just finished up. Okay. So I'd like to move on to the capital equipment request for Public Works. There we go. So Public Works has actually requested just a few items this year. First are 2 pickup trucks, budgeting at $45,000 a piece, replacing the 2006, which currently has 91,500 hard-fought plowed miles on. It needs some significant work, both body and mechanical, in order to pass inspection. The 2009 has 133,000 hard-fought miles on it. Rob says that a lot of it was done in reverse because it was our previous foreman's plow truck. We rebuilt the frame in 2017 on that truck. And what we're seeing now is the running gear is definitely needs significant work, both body and mechanical on that as well. The mini loader, which would be the Wacker Newson W 30, which is the smaller version of our mini loader. We bought that in 2013. What we found is that the WL30 is undersized, and which means it doesn't have the oomph that the machine needed, which is why when we bought the next one, we went up a size. They don't even make this size anymore. It currently needs a new blower. By that, I mean a machine to collect the snow and spit it out, which will cost about $10,000. If we buy that $10,000 attachment and run the machine for just a couple more years, we're not going to be able to put that attachment on another piece of equipment. That is a one and done kind of attachment. This assumes a $10,000 trade-in. And the reason that it's tucked here in the budget is we do think we need to replace this. However, when you look ahead, there is no place to really tuck it into the budget because of the needs coming up. We've got a loader, we've got a truck that absolutely has to be replaced. And so when you look at this, it really isn't a decision about this year or next year. It's like this year or 6 years. And I'm gonna turn this over to Rob in just a minute and let him kind of speak to that. The other piece that I'd like Rob to speak to is the small tractor fleet. So Rob's asking, or the department's asking for $35,000, taking 7 older small tractors and trading them in and replacing them with a utility trailer and 2 subcompact mowing tractors that would join the 2 zero-turn mowers that we have. So we would go from 9 down to 5. And I think you'll hear from Rob that he thinks that will really meet the need a lot better. Rob, would you like to take over before I change slides?
Yeah, sure. I can kind of expand a little bit on the small tractor investment. I think for that, it's the priority is to try to. Right now, we have 9 different tractors that do a number of different things. So one set up with a snow blower and a sweeper, and we use it on the sidewalks downtown and the rink. We have 2 subcompact tractors. One's got a backhoe on it, and we use that primarily at the cemetery to prepare graves. We have a tractor of similar size that has about all the same capabilities that we have a bush hog attachment for. So, some of this goes back to when the cemetery is a little bit more of a separate operation. Some of it goes back to when Parks and Rec had their own mowing crew that would go around and do all the parks, and then Public Works had another one. So it's kind of the last thing left over from some of those, I would say, less efficient ways of operating things. So this investment would lead to a ton of efficiency within our operation, because just, like the subcompact tractor situation, doesn't make sense to maintain 2 similar sized tractors. And since they're about the same age, one's a 2006 and one's a 2007, they're both kind of wore out. So it's not like you can just get rid of one and use the one that you've already got and be efficient with it. You kind of got to trade them both in, get what you can for now in trade value, and get one new one that can do all the things that those 2 tractors are already doing. So, and it kind of goes the same way with that with the smaller tractors, and bagging and sweeping and snow blowing and all those things can be achieved with 1 or 2 units instead of 3 or 4. And so the part that I like the most about this is it takes a 9-unit fleet and reduces it down to 5. So less equipment sitting around, less equipment to maintain. To me, it just makes sense to do it and do it while you still have a little bit of trade value in the fleet.
Questions for Rob on the equipment?
Yeah, I do have one.
Go ahead, Terry.
Rob, I'm just curious and you can please help me understand this because I don't know anything about this kind of equipment. However, when we talk about things that have the life expectancy, and we always usually talk around like the 100,000, whatever. Why is it though that with these particular things, is it the product name or who you guys buy from based on the brand? Like I can look at my own vehicle and say, like, I've got a vehicle that is at 130,000 miles and has still another 100,000 left in it based on my upkeep of it. Why is it that with these particular things, you get past a certain point and all of a sudden they all start to fall apart? And I just don't quite understand that.
So I think it's a different kind of use. We are using these, vehicles to conduct work. So for much of the life of these trucks, they had plows attached to them. And we're not talking about just when it snows, you go out and plow your driveway. We're talking about plowing 4 acres of municipal lots and 4 acres of school lots at times. And so that just is a major wear and tear on a truck. And then you think about when we use them. When we use them, we're out there in the salt. A lot of the issues, the primary issues with both of these vehicles is the bodies just rotting out around it. It's essentially falling apart. And that goes back to a little bit of why we invested so much in the public works facility, right? We had in the old facility, we just didn't have an opportunity to take care of equipment the way we do now. And so some of that wear and tear of, the 2006, for example, we didn't move over here until 2016. So that was 10 years old when we got here. So, some of it is that, but it's really just the way we use them it's not your typical, plow your driveway, go to the grocery store, haul some wood kind of stuff. Every day we're using this truck to haul trailers. We're hauling people in different places. It's just a little more of a rough use than a typical residential application.
Thank you.
Rob, going back to the trucks and what their use is, I'm assuming that since we have these medium duty trucks now, we're not doing as much plowing with pickup trucks. Is that correct?
That is correct. Very little, as a matter of fact.
So
the other, go ahead.
So I'm surprised to see $45,000 a piece for a pickup truck. I bought a truck last year, a pretty good truck, and it was not $45,000.
Well, I'm hoping that it's not going to be either. One of the things we will do is we'll definitely have to outfit them with lift gates on the back. So that's about a $5,000 investment. We'll be looking at 3/4 tons, not half tons, because we need to be able to haul trailers with equipment on them and those types of things. So it's a little bit bigger but we will be looking at, stripped down models. What I didn't want to do is, if we find them for $35,000, we'll certainly take advantage of that. What I didn't want to do is have to come back to ask for more.
Okay. Any other questions on equipment?
Yes, I'd like to ask a quick question about the small tractor fleet. Rob, I have high confidence in your recommendation about equipment because you have not led us astray, at least in my tenure. You seem to have a good handle on when to trade things in and when to switch it up and getting great deals. I'm just curious about, I like the idea of a smaller fleet, meaning, less maintenance, but sometimes with some of these more, I don't know what I'm not a mechanical person, but some of these fancier pieces of equipment with bells and whistles are sometimes more expensive to maintain. Is that the case with any of these trade-ins that you're hoping to make, or?
For the small tractor fleet, no. And in fact, there are some of the things that we have on some of the units that we're going to trade in had features that we're not going to ask for because they were just a bunch of trouble the whole time we owned them. So there are a few things that we're going to be asking to kind of take some of the bells and whistles away.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anything else on this topic? Capital equipment requests?
I have a quick question, Tom, if that's okay.
Sure. Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. We heard from the PD last week that they have sort of a tier in their vehicles where they have, like frontline vehicles and then sort of a reserve fleet of vehicles. Do you do anything similar with your trucks, or are they all frontline all the time?
Well, they have different uses, of course. In the winter, if we're all out plowing snow, these trucks are going to be here in the yard as transportation. But no, for example, today, every single unit we have was out doing something somewhere in town.
Okay. Is the 2009 that has been rebuilt inspectable?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
The mini loader, if a new blower was put on it, what's the lifetime left on it? I know it's not ideal sized, but.
Well, it's tough to estimate. I mean, I'm sure we could get 3 or 4 more years out of it. It kind of depends. We are, because it's undersized, we're asking more than it wants to provide for us. And so we are wearing that thing out, to be honest with you. And it may be fine for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. It may not be. The blower that we have on it we'd be buying a similar one. And so that lasted us 8 years. So I don't know, maybe we get 5 more. Like I said, it's going to be a little bit of a crapshoot with that machine though, because like I said, it's undersized for what we're asking it to do. The other part of it is because it's undersized and the blower is so small, it's just not an efficient use of resources right now. It's, it's far slower than the other 2 machines we have. So it's the last one out of the gate and is adding time to our winter maintenance effort.
Thanks, Rob. We set to move on? Good, let's move on. Forward.
This is our favorite part of the entire presentation. You got to get your popcorn and talk about capital infrastructure. So I just want to, this is a little bit different than previous years. So I want to talk a little bit about our capital infrastructure investment strategy, because this fall we had some meetings and talked about it and actually came up with a plan. And the budget that you have is based on that plan. So back in October, the town floated a $2 million bond specifically to address some large scale public works reconstruction projects. Those projects were requiring, they were so big that they were requiring us to phase the funding, and it was kept pushing everything out on the capital plan because we couldn't afford it. And it was creating a bottleneck. So we pulled those projects off the plan and are funding them through this bond. When we did that though, it wasn't just about pulling things off the bond when we talked. It was also about creating an annual investment of $800,000 from general fund taxes in infrastructure. So when you look at our infrastructure investment plan that's in that budget, it's a little over $1 million with $860,000 of that funded from general fund taxes. And to put that into perspective for folks who haven't been around, what normally has happened prior to 2021, Rob and I would put together a budget. Rob would come into my office and I'd say, "Ah, can't you push this off? Can't you stretch this a little bit? It's too much." And he would go back to his office and stretch it and come back and say, "I don't know, boss. This is the best I can do." And we would go to council and you guys would say, "I don't know, can't you stretch it?" And I think it's easy. And I don't mean that it's not thoughtful, but I think when you look at all the competing interests, and it's hard to sometimes see that not investing in infrastructure ultimately creates greater costs down the road. And you're not really seeing the costs that are happening every year when you're on that road until it really starts to break apart. So the plan was to try to move away from reconstruction projects to preservation projects. I'm going to try to do this, understanding that Rob's going to jump in if I go astray. But preservation means capturing the condition before it gets to a point that you need to rebuild the road. What that means is that we would have better conditions on the ground for our residents. I think better advertising for Orono. We would be looking at smaller projects, which are quicker to complete and have less disruption, and it's less costly. So when we look at that, what we know is I will use, a street that might cost $50,000 to do a preservation overlay on. You're out in a couple of days. The residents haven't gotten to the point where they're losing tire rims because they're hitting so many potholes, and people feel pretty good about the street, and you go on to the next thing. When you allow the condition on that road to deteriorate without the overlay, you're allowing water to get into those cracks, freeze, and break it apart more and do more damage to the road base. So when Rob comes in, instead of a $50,000 project, it's a $150,000 project. And wait, it's not $50,000 today or $150,000 today. It's $150,000 5 years from now, subject to all of the market influences on the cost of construction, which in my tenure has only gone up. So you end up spending a lot more on that road when you allow it to deteriorate. So we didn't just pull $800,000 out of the air. We know we have 89 lane miles of street, 17 miles of sidewalk, and that in order to maintain conditions to allow for preservation pavement, our expert is telling us that we should really be on a 15-year overlay cycle. And that, based on FY21 numbers, was about a $7.3 million investment on streets every 15 years and a $4.7 million investment on sidewalks. Take that 12 million, divide it by 15, $800,500 per year investment. So that's where the $800,000 came from. So when we look at our budget request for this year, we are looking at some drainage work on Westwood. We're looking at an overlay on Water Street, more involved on Lower Middle James School Street and Plummer Street, overlay on Broadway. Beach Street, we're looking to reconstruct, overlays on Elm and Cedar, and then Essex Street overlay. Kelly Road, we're looking to overlay that with an MPI project. That's that state municipal 50-50 shared project that we do the work and then we'll get 50% of the expenses back, up to $130,000 from the state. College Ave sidewalks, this was a huge project that Rob and his crew have taken on in-house, and they work at it $25,000 a year. We're estimating we have, I think it's 3 years left in that project to be complete. And miscellaneous improvements. So this is the miscellaneous lines are for stormwater, electrical, curbs, miscellaneous roads. It is the catch-all in the budget for the smaller projects that are not on the budget, but that we have to address. Because there is the road defect law, and if we know there's a problem and we don't address it, then the town is liable for the damage that is caused by that. So this plan will allow us to turn the corner to begin to focus on preservation projects. Rob has told me we are at a tipping point with this plan. An investment will allow us to move forward. Failing to follow the plan at this point, because we're at a tipping point, we can't just pause. It will actually set us back for years to come. So when Councillor Perry tells me that he is concerned about the budget, we always come back and think of where might cuts happen. And I know, given our history, that capital infrastructure is a place that will sometimes happen. I want people to understand that when I said to Rob, can you show me what just getting a piece of this increase would be this year? He said, okay, so if we made a $400,000 investment, my 5-year plan becomes a 10-year plan. We're going to increase the project costs. So that 400,000 is based on just shuffling the numbers he has today, but those numbers are going to go up as conditions deteriorate and costs of service go up. Our preservation turns into reconstruction, and the intangibles are going to be the impacts to residents and visitors as those conditions continue to deteriorate. And this is where I really want Rob to be able to talk about what people are seeing here and why we picked these pictures.
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to demonstrate where some of the projects that fall on the list, even in our current 5-year plan, what they look like today, because we always said there aren't very many things on the 5-year plan that we couldn't justify doing tomorrow. And I think when you look at these 3 locations, Grove Street, Dryden Terrace, and Cromwell Drive, that's pretty evident. I think anyone, you don't have to be a pavement expert to take a look at Cromwell Drive and think, geez, that's probably due for a resurfacing. Well, in our 5-year plan, Cromwell Drive and Lexington are a couple of years out. So when you look at extending that project out into a 5-year plan, it actually moves out to FY28. So in the 10-year plan, and of course, this was done as more of an exercise than anything, so there's more thought to be put into it. But in the 10-year plan, this one would be done in 2027, 6 years from now. And maybe the road would still be in a situation where a shim and overlay would work, but it might not be, given some of the rutting and cracking that you're getting in some of those places, starting to show evidence of basal failure. So, some of that stuff kind of builds on itself, and the deterioration rate accelerates the older it gets. Grove Street and Dryden Terrace, same situation. Dryden Terrace moves out to FY26 as opposed to FY24. And so, 2023 or 2026. So, I think, and these 3 roads are kind of pretty typical of that middle group where they're not falling apart. They're not in great shape. They're perfect examples of places where preservation paving gains that you protect the investment. You gain 10 to 12 years. And in that 10 to 12 years down the road, you're probably still in a pretty good place because you protected the investment. Essex Street, I think, is still my shining example of a place where the town invested, back in 2008, 9, the town invested a significant amount of money in a road that was in terrible condition. That road today is in okay shape, starting to show cracking, heaving, those kinds of things. Now's the time to invest instead of I think we spent $500,000 to $600,000 in 2009. Now $150,000 overlay protects that, adds 10 more years to that investment. And so it's just a far better, preservation paving is a far better return on investment when you talk about quality life and the longevity of the product. So.
Tom, you're muted.
Probably better that way. I said so hard to argue with Rob. He does such a good job of justifying what he wants and needs and what we need. Questions or comments on this part of it?
Yeah. Rob, you also have culvert, and on the Essex Street overlay is also culvert replacement and ditching. Is that so that's part of that whole, that's part of the whole 150,000?
Yeah, that's just kind of the standard. In about
That's what you do.
10 years or so, you're going to want to do some basic driveway culverts, those sorts of things, clean them up because you want to keep the water out of the road as best you can.
Okay, so it includes that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
So Rob, I'm it's funny because I know that when we look at things like Benneck's always one of those places like a nice road or whatever, because those are major thoroughfares. But I live down in an area that I don't know the last time Beach Street was ever touched, because it looks like something from out in the 20s or something, because we got potholes to fall in. And no one ever says anything. We're really good about it. We figure it's going to happen over time at some point, but it is pretty bad. But having been on a council before, in Northern Maine, we had the same exact kind of thing. And presenting it the way you're presenting it is, you can go about things thinking like we can push things, but ultimately it's going to cost you a pretty penny. And we actually ran against that. It ended up costing, by putting it down the road a bit, it increased threefold. And we had to go out and invest in money to catch things back up, but we put it on a 10-year plan. So all the roads fell within that 10-year, everybody's going to get redone, which is a harder world and where that is, simply because of now the farm equipment is so much bigger, so much heavier. So they had to go even deeper, and it's not the old potato truck days, what it used to be. So, but what they did, they invested on that side of it, and it was a stinger in the front end, but everybody figured out how we knew that this was going to be a set thing every year after year after year to make sure things are maintained, which has been a great result. But I agree with you. I don't think we can continue to kick a can down and say like, oh, let's push this over here and on our infrastructure, because yeah, ultimately these things are going to crumble and we're going to be in a bad state. So I appreciate all the work you're putting into this, and I'm obviously behind what you're saying, because we my short time in council, we tend to kind of like put it on you, and I don't think it's fair. So
yeah, I like this plan, and I've often said similar things every year, but like, infrastructure, when it comes to the public who are looking at their tax bill, infrastructure isn't sexy. people want to hear about community services, and they want to advocate for more community services or get upset if community services are getting cut. But it's not, infrastructure isn't something that folks are necessarily focusing on. I think the average person, surely we have people in this community who are keyed into this issue and not care deeply about it, but I don't think that it's at the top of a lot of general community members' minds. But I think it's the most important thing, apart from our budget to actually staff the town. Infrastructure is right behind that in terms of I mean, it's something that gets habitually overlooked in communities all across the country and by the federal government as
Yep.
well. And it is so important. And I think that this is a smart approach. I think that, like Terry said, it's like in Fort Fairfield, it's going to sting at first, but I think that this is the right thing to do and better to maintain than to have to, say, oh, well, maybe someday we'll have more money to invest in a giant project. Like, I'm always advocating for not kicking the can down the road on infrastructure. So I like this plan.
Sophie, we're pretty confident that none of the recovery money could be used for any of these projects.
Yes, we are actually very confident. I've been through the guidance. There is a loophole, but it has to relate right back to an infrastructure need caused by the pandemic. And we just I can't equate that to a road. It is sewer, which would be storm or sanitary, broadband or water that we can use that for. Investments, capital investments in public buildings to allow for operations based as a result of the pandemic. So that's where we're going to talk a little bit about the Zoom
Yep.
upgrade. But
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this aspect of the budget, Jeff?
I love the idea of doing the maintenance now, right? So we don't incur the huge cost later. I'd also love to hear at some point, but probably not as part of the budget discussion, information on developing not only paved roads, but high quality gravel roads. I've done some reading that says, moderate and high use roads are certainly more cost effective to pave, but low use roads can often be maintained as high quality gravel roads at a cost saving. So our preference to pave and our practice to pave is really good, but there may be some ways to reduce costs in the long term there. I'd like to talk about it later at some point.
Yep. Anything else? Then let's move on.
we are ready to go to WPCF. So when we talk about our water pollution control facility, we're really talking about three different kind of cost centers. One is our collection system. We have 23 miles of collection infrastructure pipes. We have 500 manholes and 4 pump stations. We also have wastewater treatment, which would be our headworks, where we are permitted to treat 1.84 million gallons a day. We have secondary activated sludge, ultraviolet light for disinfection, and then when everything is been dewatered and pressed, we take that remaining sludge up to Juniper Ridge and dispose of it. We also have combined sewer overflow infrastructure. So we have a pipe, we are permitted, that's a permitted overflow, but it does add a lot to our priorities and our permitting. Any questions about WPCF? Great, no, just jumping on to the next slide. So I do want to just highlight that our personnel costs have gone up a little bit this year. We have 6 full-time, for this budget, we have 6 full-time staffers, and this does include the other half of that shared labor position. So while the shared laborer works in the wintertime for Public Works on sidewalks, in the summer, that shared laborer joins an operator and is the second body out as we flush and clean, maintain, inspect our mains. So sewer mains, just like we talked about, the town doesn't have immunity at some points with roads and road construction. Sewer mains are another place that if we are not maintaining them and they back up into people's homes, that does tons of damage. Not only does it make people angry, but it does a lot of damage to their homes. And if we're not doing the maintenance, we lose our immunity, and that suddenly becomes a very costly insurance claim. So that full-time salary line is for 6.5 people. The increase in that line is primarily the adding back the shared labor position, but we also had a promotion in our ranks this year. Chris Prue was promoted from the lab tech to the deputy superintendent and is now working. He will eventually be our superintendent. We're hoping to keep a hold of Joe as long as he's willing to stay, but it's nice to have a plan, and I think it will be good to have Chris come on board. When we look at WPCF, the other big cost center that we have is debt. And that debt that you see right in your budget is up about $40,000 from last year, and it just has to do with the way we brought the new debt on. We also have taken on new debt. We just don't have a payment scheduled in FY22, but that's the $1 million to fix the inflow and infiltration in the Mahaney subdivision. We're estimating, we don't have a closing rate yet, but we are estimating that the repayment on that debt is going to be about $68,000 to $70,000 per year. Electricity is a huge component of our operating costs. We run blowers as part of our process control, and that takes a lot of electricity. We run pumps, which also takes a lot of electricity. Between pumps and sludge disposal, we're expecting to spend about $211,000. To put that into perspective, when I came here 10 years ago, that number was closer to $115,000 to $20,000. So we've seen incredible increases on both sides. Administration, these are, the town gets $138,825 as a payment from WPCF because we manage all of their billing and collections and personnel, and we pay all their bills. So this is an internal fund-to-fund transfer to kind of make the town whole. It also, that $147,500 includes lien fees, legal fees, audit fees, so just the general administration costs. Operations is everything else, and you will see that on a $1,741,000 budget, that is not a lot of money for everything else, $191,000. Reserves, we are suggesting that we put $52,000 to reserves next year. So I want to talk just for a minute about expenses and reserves, and I want to be able to bring everybody in so I can see your faces. Our annual depreciation in WPCF is right around $600,000 a year. In a perfect world, we would be putting away $600,000 of cash on the theory that when we get to the end of depreciation, you're at the end of your useful life and you'd use that money to then renovate, rehab. The problem that we have is, in an effort to keep costs low, we have not been putting money into reserves. But as you notice in the budget, we're taking money out of reserves at a pretty heavy clip in order to keep dealing with the infrastructure needs of the of the collection system. So I am very, very concerned about our level of reserve funding. And I will just tell you that if we keep this up, in the next 2 years, you're going to start seeing a need for rate increases to be able to fund capital projects out of the rates as opposed to out of the reserves. So I am very concerned where we are with WPCF. Joe, do you want to add to that?
Trying to find it. I really don't have a whole lot to add. I mean, I agree with you 100%. I'm very concerned about the rate that we're taking out of reserves, but the trouble is we're beholden to our CSO management plan, that we've got projects we need to do. We tried to stay a little less, but we've also got to keep up. You know, we try to stay with Public Works so that we're all working on the road at the same time. So that's part of the reason we had to borrow $1 million.
I think the other piece that has made it very difficult is, you know, I went back and I was pulling some information as I was preparing for this presentation. And back in 2015, 2016, Joe and I came to council with a rate increase plan, and we were going to do 10 cents every time. And by the time we got to 2022, we were going to have a rate of $5.10 per 100 cubic feet. Right now, we've had to take some big jumps instead, and we're at $5.35. What's interesting to me is based on the consumption data we had at the time, $5.10 per 100 cubic feet got us more revenue than $5.35 gets us now. And I think that's on one of my slides to talk about with you, because our billing is 100% based on how much people use water. As people conserve, they use less water, we get less money. Unfortunately, the costs of running a treatment facility don't correlate with how much influent we take at the plant. There are lots of fixed costs. It doesn't matter if we don't treat any water. So what we are seeing is this trend. We're about 14 to 16% decline in consumption, which for the environment, I would guess is a really good thing, right? We want people to conserve. But for our pocketbooks, it makes it more expensive per 100 cubic feet to run the plant, because we have so many fixed costs that we're trying to spread over that rate. The other issue that Joe and I are concerned about is that the water district has begun some initial conversations about rate increases. What we know, we can track the data with rate increases. When water systems put in a higher rate, people will conserve even more for a while. It kind of has an elastic effect. They conserve and then it's supposed to kind of bounce back up. In Orono, we tend to conserve and not really bounce all the way back up. So Joe and I we are concerned about that. Before we move on in the expense to the revenue side, do you have any questions about the expense budget that you'd like us to tackle?
Actually, Sophie, I just had a question. It's like, when we're looking at this usage thing, my mind would say that this was obviously based on the fact that we're in a pandemic and the students weren't here. It's not? I mean, did we not have this conversation before that because of the student base not being here, that things weren't used as much? So I was wondering if like next year it's gonna be a different scenario.
So when I say trending, I'm talking about trends from like 2016, 2015, trending down. We did see a bit of a drop and I think it has a lot to do with restaurants and, places that historically use lots of water. But it wasn't as bad as we thought it would be, Terry, because I think we had a lot of people at home, and I don't know, like my daughter contributed to the delinquency of not conserving water. So I think that it is a little bit of, I don't know how far we'll bounce back up, but the trend is definitely downward. And, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
Tom,
me?
you're muted.
Oh. No, I was going to say too, I remember having this conversation last year, and like 1/3, it's about 1/3, Joe, I think you said, of our town is on well water, right? Like they don't even use a public public
yeah.
water. Is there a way to expand that? I know it would be incredibly costly to get more people on public water.
So I can tell you from a sewer perspective, if somebody was going to come in and they wanted to extend the line, the general rule of thumb is that they were going to pay for that extension of the line, and then everybody can connect in as they go. One of the issues that Joe has is that our most logical place for expansion of this main and bringing more customers on is going to be the Park Street corridor. I mean, we are preparing for that to kind of begin to grow. And the hillside main that everything flows in through from the pump station, it's all collected on the Penobscot Street pump station. So everything flows from that side of Park Street down into the hillside main. And it is a bottleneck. It is a smaller main than everything else. And as part of the edges permitting, we are going to have to upsize that. So that's a $500,000 project. Joe and I are going to be back to talk with you about, and Rob, about a larger project on Hillside Street off the budget. But
Laura? Oh, muted.
Weren't you just saying that the Recovery Act covers water, sewer, infrastructure?
So our plan is to come back to you now that we know what it can be used for, and suggest that we use part of that on the hillside upgrade, which is a $550,000 WPCF project. But also this spring, Rob found a pretty significant storm drain, storm sewer system issue on hillside as well. So that we're going to come back to you and suggest that we use a significant piece of our ARPA money on that.
Can you talk a little bit more about you were talking about the reserves, and you're putting the 50,000 into the reserve is what's in the budget this year, but you're still very concerned because in case we don't continue to put it in at that rate, or 50,000 doesn't begin to cut what we should be putting in for this year. Okay, so what's the number we're supposed to be putting in this year?
So in an ideal world, you would be at about 600,000, which is, you try to match your depreciation in an ideal world. We're not ideal. I would like to see us at more like 100 or 150,000 a year.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't catch that. Okay.
I saw Councillor Osher shaking her head, nodding her head. I don't know if she was just agreeing with me or if she wanted to say something.
No, I was agreeing. I remember that you had said 600,000, and I think that that's really wise. It's a conservative way to budget, but it means that if you put that 600,000 in every year, when we need new infrastructure or upgrades, that we don't have to get a bond or borrow money. So I hope that we can figure out how to put more away.
I agree. It would be great to be able to put more away, but let's remember that a good portion of our town does not contribute to the sewer system. and it runs on the user fees. It's an enterprise account that's supposed to take in enough money to support its operation. So I think we got to keep that in mind too. Joe, I wouldn't think it was fair if we didn't ask you the impact of the halftime person that you share with Public Works, and what the problem has been this year without that person, and what you can benefit from with the person.
Yes. See, right now I have 2 operators out on the road cleaning sewers. That leaves me kind of short-handed here at the plant, especially like I had a guy working alone the other day that I would have felt a lot better if there was somebody there with him, which would give me, if I had my other operator, I'd have been better off. But we've still got a lot of work to do here at the plant. The halftime position keeps my sewer cleaning going all summer, and then they go right on to right-of-way cleaning. So their summer's pretty well tied up right there. Plus they'll go out and do inspections on the off the road sewers that are in the right-of-ways. Which this is all driven by the insurance company and Maine DEP. Because if we don't maintain them, we're going to be in trouble, because they're starting to put fines out for sanitary sewer overflows. I've read it for different towns, and I'm not sure why they're getting the fines so much, as if they're not doing the due diligence to maintain their sewers, then maybe that's why. I'm not sure, but if we can do our due diligence and still keep my operators here in the plant, to maintain the plant itself, because in the summertime, we've got a lot of maintenance to do. We swap tanks, we clean tanks, swap clarifiers and clean those and maintain them. There's a lot to this.
Yep, I'm well aware. Thank you, Joe.
I'm wondering if Joe and Rob could just speak a little bit to the contingency that shared labor position gives us, and our cross training between departments.
Well, I mean, if we had not had the halftime position in the past, when my guys all went out with the COVID, we had nothing. But I had Dylan over at Public Works, who'd worked here, for 6 months, and he learned to do the lab. He learned to do call-ins and all that for us when he was on our 6 months. And so Rob sent, well, I had both of our halftime guys that had been here. The one that we sent over and went to full time, and Dylan, who had been here before. So they bailed us out while we were out for 2 weeks. So I mean, that to me, that's a classic example right there of how this is working out for us, or how it can work out for us.
Hey, Tom.
I think we had
Go ahead.
another example. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say, Tom, I just want, Joe, as you always know, I'm your biggest fan. I think when we look at a lot of different departments, there's always these contractual agreements that are always in place that we have no control. We just allow to go. Here's a department that actually needs something. And so as we discuss this stuff, it's obviously very important to Joe to help him through when he's explaining this. So if we're having discussions about whether or not we proceed with this, I think it's a no-brainer. Like I said, we don't have contractual agreements based on contracts, but it's a necessity that it's only part-time shared. So I just think it's very important. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Rob.
Rob, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add, we kind of had it in the converse. We've had a situation where I had somebody out for an extended medical leave in the wintertime, plow truck driver that we needed to fill. And since we had the shared position, we could sort of trade. So I could send that person over to Joe to work with Joe's people. And I was able to utilize one of Joe's people who had a CDL license to cover plow routes. And so that cross training comes in handy on for both departments for sure.
Yep, good. Other questions or comments? Ready to move on to our next topic? Okay.
When we look at WPCF, our expense budget equals our revenue budget. So we are projecting to bring in about sorry, I skipped that one. There we go. We are projecting to bring in about $1.7 million in sewer user fees. This is assuming an increase in the rates, and I will talk about that as we get to the end of the presentation.
Yep.
One of the places that we have lost revenue in WPCF as well is in the earnings on investments. We were earning almost $30,000 a year in interest on money that Joe had in the bank. And the interest rates have tanked. And also, as we've used the reserves, we have less money to earn money on. And then $5,100 in miscellaneous revenue. Somebody's going to connect a new house to the sewer system. There's a fee associated with that. And we also can charge for our camera to be used if people need it. So when we look at our capital investments, we have investments of about $1.5 million planned for WPCF. 975,000 of that is the Mahaney subdivision upgrade that we have the $1 million loan for. So we expect to use $25,000 in this fiscal year for designing that, and then 975,000 next year. We also have to begin the design on the hillside upsize. Chapel Road, there are some manholes and some main that need to be replaced as part of Rob's infrastructure project on Chapel and College Heights. Westwood Drive, is when the school is done with their project, before Rob goes in to put final pavement on that road, Rob's going to do some ditching, and Joe's going to come out of the school parking lot and head towards the town woodlot, I guess is how I would frame it. Going to take a left and go up to the end of the street. That is old clay pipe, and it has got to be a pretty significant contributor to our CSO issues. He also plans to go in this year and address that final piece of the Mill Street catch basin that we had a sanitary storm sewer separation project. We got into it last year and discovered that there was some really incredibly wonky plumbing that happened in between the two buildings and under or in the middle of the structure. So we got all of the pipe in the ground and the infrastructure in the ground, but then buttoned it up, and Joe is going to go back in working with a plumber to try to fix the problem so we can do that separation. And Joe has a $20,000 pocket of funds that he can access during the year out of the sewer infrastructure reserve if he has an emergency. So that is there, much like Rob's miscellaneous funds. Questions about Joe's infrastructure? So an increase is definitely needed. We have increased operating costs, so personnel don't get cheaper as we go through time. The electricity and sludge disposal costs are going up, workers' comp is going up, so there are a lot of operating costs that are going up. Our debt has increased now, but also starting next year, we are going to see that extra $70,000 coming in to be paid. We have lack of adequate funding towards reserves and continued declining trends in usage, all kind of contribute to a need for a rate increase. We are at $5.35 per 100 cubic feet. Joe and I are still evaluating consumption because we're seeing some changes and we're getting towards the end of the fiscal year. But at this point, it looks like 50 cents now and 50 cents next year get us to a point where we can cover the debt and hopefully make small inroad in the payment to reserves, the allocation to reserves. As much as I would love to get close to 600,000, I don't think we will ever do that. But I do think we need to do two things. If you notice in Joe's plan, when we get a couple years out in the plan, we pretty much stop our investments for a while. And part of that's because we've done a lot of them already, and sewer pipe lasts for a while. But the other is a real need to kind of replenish the coffers to be able to have a good reserve if there's an emergency. So everybody always likes to compare. What does that mean? So 50 cents will get us about $136,000 a year more in income. But what that means to Orono right now, our rate, this is a rate for 80,000 cubic feet. And that's 8,000 cubic feet a year divided by 4 quarters equally. So 2,000 cubic feet per quarter. And it was the way that we could get everybody to compare apples. So if you look, we are the lowest in the region still. Bangor, Brewer, Old Town are all up. I would say we put some of these in here because they're regional and some of them are in here because they're more match our size. BZ has the closest rate, but I would argue they're also probably one of the smaller systems in here. It just didn't seem right to compare if we're not talking about our neighbor. So these are updated for 2021 in July 1, 2021. There are a couple that are actually taking rate increases for July 1 that show here. So I understand that we are getting late in the hour, and I want to make sure we have time for people to chat.
Sophie, the figure you just had on the screen for Orono, that reflected the 50-cent increase?
You're on mute, Sophie.
I don't think that reflected the increase. No, that's our current rate.
With the increase, you'd add $40 to that. So we would go.
It would be was it 428 before?
Yeah, so it would
So
go to 468.
68 would still be very low in comparison. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions? Comments, concerns?
I just had a question from back to Rob from the Public Works side. Is that okay right now, or should I wait?
Sure. No, go right ahead.
So Rob, I was curious about where you typically run on the service levels on tier 3 with everything. And I just noticed that street sign and traffic signals were running in service level 2. Why is that?
Really, when it comes to particularly managing traffic signals, we don't have any in-house capabilities to support those operations. We rely heavily on the city of Bangor and their staff to help us maintain those. I have some very cursory trainings and can kind of, at the diagnosis level, I can kind of to figure out what's going on with a signal, but I'm not trained or qualified to make the repairs. And so almost everything that we do in that aspect is outsourced some way, which kind of drags our service level tier down, because that means that we're working on somebody else's schedule to get repairs done.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Looks like we don't have any questions. Anything else you have for us tonight, Sophie?
Nope, just a reminder that we're coming back on Monday to talk about public services, which would be community development, code planning, assessing, and economic development, as well as Parks and Rec and the library. So that should be an exciting night. And then on Thursday, we're going to gather for a community development committee meeting. Kyle's got a quick report back from the planning board about our solar ordinance with some minor suggestions. We want to talk about a letter that we received from the municipal review committee about some changes to the contract, to see what, just review that with council. Councillor Wingart is all prepared to talk about a land acknowledgement that he has worked on. And I'm missing something. I wrote it down, but it's escaping me at this moment.
It'll be there.
I will not be able to work tomorrow. I have a family commitment that I need to take care of. But if I get any more formal information, I will redo slides for you and get them out, charts for you, so that you can have some updated information.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we are all set for tonight, evidently, and we'll be back at this again on Monday for our third workshop. And thank you all for your attendance and attention.
I think Councillor Mitchell had her hand raised.
I didn't even notice, but go ahead.
I just didn't know for the Community Development Committee whether we were going to have a chance to talk about those DEI deliverables that I had emailed out.
I don't think it's going to make it on the agenda this time.
Okay.
All set. All right. See you folks Monday. Have a wonderful
Night,
weekend.
everyone. Thank you.
Night.